Welcome to Teatime Tales. I am the tale teller, and today I am going to tell you the tale of the Lost Teapot. Once there was a girl named Holly, whose stepmother did not treat her very well at all. She, in fact, was quite unkind, and often would give Holly pointless chores just to keep her busy and keep her working. Meanwhile, Holly's stepsister, Ivy, didn't have to do much at all. She was vain and spoiled and just sat around all day. Well, one day, Holly had to go to the well to wash the dishes, and she carried them out there. And one thing she had to rinse was their precious porcelain teapot. Well, she took the teapot, she put it into the water of the well, and accidentally it slipped from her fingers and tumbled down into the water and disappeared. Well, Holly told her stepmother, and she was furious. She said, "Well, if you lost that teapot, then you go and get it." Holly said, "Well, I can't go down in the well." "You will go down in that well, and you won't come back until you've got the teapot." Well, there was no changing her mind and no arguing. So Holly went to the well, and she jumped in. And she swam down, down, down into those cold, dark waters. She held her breath as long as she could as she swam down, down further into the darkness, till she couldn't hold her breath any longer, and everything went black. The next thing Holly knew was she awoke in a meadow. And she looked around and had no idea where she was. And there beside her was the teapot. "Huh," thought Holly, "I must be at the bottom of the well." So she picked up the teapot and began to walk. Because what else was she going to do? Well, she walked, followed a path along the edge of the wood, until she came to a bakery. And as she was walking past the bakery, with the lovely smells wafting out the door, she heard voices, tiny cries, and they were shouting, "Take us out or we will burn! Take us out or we will burn!" Holly went inside, and she found, inside the oven, where the voices were coming from, and there were tea cakes, and they were shouting, "Take us out or we will burn!" Well, Holly found a towel, and she went over and she opened the ovens, and she took out the trays of tea cakes and put them on the counter. And they said, "Thank you. Now please take some of us for yourself." So Holly gathered up a few tea cakes and put them in her pockets, and off she went. And she continued to follow the path. And eventually she passed a small tree. And as she was walking past the tree, she heard, shake us, we're ready to fall." Holly said, "Okay." So she shook the tree, and the leaves showered down onto the ground. And when they were on the ground, she heard them say, "Now take some of us and fill your teapot." Holly said, "All right," and she picked up the leaves and she put them in her teapot, and off she went. And she walked down the path until finally she came to a cottage. And sitting outside the cottage was an old woman whose face was all angry and twisted, and she shouted at Holly and she said, "You, get in here and make me some tea and cakes." Holly said, "Well, all right, I can do that for you." And when she said that, the old woman's face softened, and she suddenly looked like one of the kindest women Holly had ever seen. So they went inside, and Holly boiled the kettle, and she made the tea, and the leaves were delicious, because of course they were tea leaves. And she heated up the cakes again, and she made them tea and cakes on the table. And Holly stayed there, and she laughed and she talked with the old woman, till she finally said, "Well, look, I better be getting back home, but I have no idea how to get there." The old woman said, "Well, you just go through that door, and I'm sure you'll find your way back." Well, Holly picked up the teapot, and she thanked the old woman for her pleasant company. She went through the door, and as soon as she passed under the lintel, she opened her eyes and was back beside the well with the teapot in her hands, except the teapot was very heavy. So she lifted the lid and was amazed because the teapot was full of gold. Well, she ran back to the house, and by now her father was at home, and she told him the story of what had happened, of her adventure down the well, and everything that she saw, and of the gold that appeared in the teapot. Well, the next day, the stepmother was in a terrible mood, because she thought the good fortune should have fallen to her own daughter, Ivy, and she stormed about the place. And eventually she said, "I know what we need to do. Ivy, you take that teapot and go down the well and get some of that gold for us." And Ivy said, "Well, I'm not going down that well. Who knows what's down there, and it's cold and I'll get wet." "You are going down that well and I'll hear nothing else for it." Well, there was no changing her mind and there was no arguing. So Ivy took the teapot and went to the well, and she jumped in and she sank down into the darkness. She held her breath until she couldn't hold it anymore, and the next thing she knew, she awoke in the meadow with the teapot. Not too happy to be there at all. Well, she took the teapot and off she went down the path, just like she heard her stepsister had. And she came to the bakery, and she heard tiny voices shouting from inside, saying, "Take us out or we will burn." "Ha! Take yourselves out, I've no time for that." And off she went down the path. And she came to the tree, and she heard, shake us, it's time for us to fall." "Well, shake yourself, I must be off, I've things to find." And off she went. And of course she came to the cottage. She went into the cottage, and sitting by the fire was the old woman, who said, "Get out and make me some tea and cakes." "I am not making anything for you. I want some of the gold like you gave yesterday." The old woman said, "Oh, do you now? Well, I tell you what, you go through that door and I'm sure you'll get just what you deserve." Very proud, Ivy walked through the door, and as soon as she passed through the lintel, she opened her eyes and she was standing beside the well. She was holding the teapot and it felt very heavy. So she ran into the house and she said, I did it, I got some of the treasure. That is just for me, just what I deserve." And she turned over the teapot, and out from the top poured smelly, gooey sludge, like the stuff you'd find at the bottom of a well. And it poured all over the kitchen table. And perhaps Ivy did get what she deserved. And that is the story of the Lost Teapot.